Now, you've moved in Snapdragon to 64-bit computing. Previously with Crate, you had, which was a 32-bit architecture, so the size of an integer was 32 bits. So now you've moved to having the size of an integer being 64 bits. So can you talk about the advantages that users will see with 64-bit computing, or what they're seeing right now, because you offer that right now? So are there particular applications where they'll really see a boost, or is this something that they'll see just generally across everything that they do with their smartphone?
Okay, so there's three main parts to that 64-bit story. So Qualcomm is now providing the 64-bit chips. Google has just now released Android Lollipop, which is their first 64-bit operating system, and that's not on pushed out to every phone yet. But then the final component to that are those 64-bit apps. So not all three pillars are in place right yet. This is still the very early phases of this 64-bit transition to mobile. So I don't have any good examples of naming an app that doesn't exist and seeing X amount of performance gain. What we are seeing are in some performance gains from 64-bit are more on the synthetic benchmarks. But synthetic benchmarks don't always represent what the user is doing, what the apps they're using, the usages they're seeing. So we're at that early stage where I couldn't tell you an exact usage, but we've seen benefits on everything from floating point and spec to JavaScript, which helps with some web browsing. But these are very, again, synthetic use cases.
When we say synthetic, these are benchmarks that you've created to test various aspects. Is that correct?
Yes, it's some benchmarks we do internally or create internally. Other ones are industry standard, where multiple companies create these benchmarks. And yes, when I say synthetic, it's they've created a custom test that isn't necessarily, tries to reflect what real world use cases is or are, but it's not the actual use case itself. So again, that going back to the server example, Spec is designed for high-end CPUs, and Spec 2006 has a weather simulation subtest within it. But in your smartphone, again, you load an app that tells you what the weather is now. You don't care what it's predicting it, a month from now. So it's not necessarily reflective of how a smartphone user or a tablet user would use their phone. That's why we're really anxious to see, once we do have that third pillar of the 64-bit ecosystem, when people start creating these apps, to see what sort of benefits we'll see. We've been talking about 64-bit as a way to future-proof, as you have the hardware component. Now as the operating system and app component come into place, you're not left behind. Another aspect of that is addressable memory. Right now, most smartphones and tablets are, they're all 4 gigs or below. So you're not getting the benefit of addressing beyond 4 gigs at this point. But that's something that, will be happening, and I'm sure in the not too distant future.
Right, and that was part of the motivation for 64-bit computing in high-end machines, right? Is now we have addressing, it's very easy to address, have a higher number of addresses, and being able to very, very simply address a larger amount of memory.